Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee meeting. My name is Steve Fletcher. I'm the Vice Chair of this committee, and I'll be chairing today's meeting in the absence of our Chair, Councilmember Cano, who is absent as she's attending to other city business. With that, I'll call this regular meeting to order. I'll note that I'm joined at the dais by Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee members Cunningham, Palmisano, Vice President Jenkins, and Councilmember Ellison, and also by Councilmember Schrader. Thanks for joining us. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. And we'll get onto our agenda, but before we proceed to the agenda, I'd like to note that we have added a status report from staff on the draft ketamine report, which has been in the news in the past week. That is the final item on our agenda today. We also have a number of guests who have come to address this body about their concerns on this topic. And so although this item wasn't noticed as a public hearing, I'm proposing to amend the agenda to allow for a defined public comment period on that subject for a period of up to 30 minutes, during which time we will accept public comments on this topic. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to comment. I recommend that we take public comments as the first action on that item before we receive the report from staff. And I'd like to take a quick voice vote on that proposal to amend the agenda to allow for public comments for a period of up to 30 minutes on the ketamine report, which is item number 5. Is there any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That carries and the agenda has been amended. With that, I'd now like to address those who are here to speak to the ketamine report. If you are here to speak to that issue, I invite you to register your name with the clerk. Kelly, please raise your hand so that folks know who you are. We will take speakers in the order they are registered, so please sign up with the clerk so that we can proceed in an orderly fashion. Each speaker will be recognized for up to 3 minutes. If we have any time remaining, we will open the floor to additional comments. And with that, I will move on to our regular, I'm sorry. And I'll also note that if you prefer not to speak today but would like to submit your written commentary, we welcome that as well. You can give any written comments you have to the clerk, and she will ensure that your written comments are provided to all council members and are included in the public record. Also, if you have any materials to submit on this subject, please also give those to the clerk so we can ensure copies are provided to all council members and are also included in the public record. I'll also note that we have arranged an overflow space across the hall in room 319 for those who would like a seat. You can monitor these proceedings on the TV in that room. And finally, we have arranged to have interpreters present today in case anyone needs that assistance to participate this afternoon. And I'll ask right now if there's any need for interpretive support from any member of the public. If you see anybody who needs interpretation, please direct them to Nick in the back, and we'll make sure to have interpretive assistance for them for this meeting. And thank you, everyone. With that, we'll welcome everyone to register with the clerk to speak on item number 5. And colleagues, while they begin to do that, we'll continue with the agenda. We'll begin today with the consent agenda, which includes 3 items. Those items are as follows. First, authorizing a contract amendment in an amount of not to exceed $65,000 with Patricia Helen for a total authorization of up to $195,000 and extending that contract through April 30th, 2019 for special event planning services for the police department. Second, approving a grant application by the police department for a total amount of $600,000 from the U.S. Department of Justice to equip all sworn personnel with body-worn cameras. And third, authorizing a contract amendment in an amount of not to exceed $75,000 with the Minnesota Homeland Security and Emergency Management Department for a total authorization not to exceed $164,500 and extending that contract through June 30th, 2020 for additional costs related to outstate bomb disposal services. Would any of my colleagues like to pull any of these items for discussion? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That carries and the consent agenda has been approved. That brings us to the 2 discussion items on our agenda. And first, we have a report about the police department's co-responder program. Here to make that presentation is Inspector Kathy Waite. Welcome, Inspector.
Good afternoon. I think you should have before you my PowerPoint. So I'll just be going off of that. I unfortunately did not consider all those sitting behind me and the fact that they may not have knowledge of the program, so I might go a bit more into detail with some of that.
Are there copies of your presentation?
It's on the screen there. Oh, okay. I don't believe there's a presentation that we have copies of.
Lita Schuster. Lita, you have it.
Mr. Chair, the clerk's office hasn't gotten a copy of that, but if I can borrow it very quickly, I can go make a few copies very quickly if we need them.
Do you need us to have that for reference for your presentation, you think?
I don't think you need it.
Okay. Then let's go ahead and proceed.
All right. So the co-responder program, the purpose of that is to have the opportunity for a patrol officer to work directly with a mental health provider when responding to calls. So this group, it's a pilot project, and there are 2 teams. Both teams actually physically operate out of the 5th precinct, which is in the Southwest community, and they respond to calls in the 3rd precinct, which covers South Minneapolis, and Southwest 5th precinct. So these 2 teams are able to go out and respond to 911 calls involving emotionally disturbed persons. They are formally called EDP calls through the 911 system, so I'll be referring to those calls as such. The team is really able to provide a comprehensive service to those that are in the midst of mental health crisis, and they're able to work in tandem in assisting the clients that they come across out on the street. The 2 teams, they work side by side Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. And in doing so, obviously they're not available 24/7. What they do in order to fill that gap is every Monday morning, they review all the 911 calls for service that have occurred in the 3rd precinct and in the 5th precinct. And in doing so, they do follow up on those calls. So whether it means actually physically going out to a home or making a telephone call, they always make every effort to go and make sure that they've had additional contacts so they're able to provide resources, or perhaps even going out to the person's home and doing an assessment right on scene. The goals of the program originally were really focused on reducing the calls for service for EDP calls. What we have found is we've actually seen a slight increase in calls, and I think I attribute that to the fact that it's gotten a lot of positive press. We've gotten some good feedback from community members that have already worked with the co-responders, and so we've got family members and friends, and certainly a lot of the facilities that work very closely with the mental health community, and they're calling more frequently and asking for the co-responders, oftentimes by name. So we find that people are calling more frequently because they have that comfort level now, which is a good thing. Another goal was to really reduce the amount of time that a routine patrol officer would be spent on these EDP calls. So what happens is when an EDP call is dispatched through 911, we'll have officers responding that are 2 officers in a squad car. That's just standard procedure that a 2-person squad would respond to EDP calls. So they continue to respond while at the same time dispatch will notify the co-responder teams that there is a call as well. And these teams then also proceed to the call site. Upon arrival, they will wait until the scene is rendered safe, and then they'll respond to the scene directly and speak with the client. What we have found actually is that it was always my impression that we would have the 2-person squad responding first, but we've already developed some significant relationships in the community, and because they know the clients and they know a lot of the homes or residents where people are being treated, that they're just calling off that 2-person squad altogether and responding on their own. This again frees up the time for that 2-person squad to continue on responding to other 911 calls, and it allows that co-responder team now to take as much time as they need with the client, again, providing on-scene assessment in their home with the goal of really keeping people out in the community. Another goal is, of course, we want to keep people in the community. The jail is no place for people that are struggling with mental illness. The hospital, although at times is really helpful for folks, that is not always the ideal location for people either. We do have situations where people request to go to the hospital, and certainly we want to do whatever we can for the clients, but oftentimes too, that's not necessary, and they're better served to be in the community. Being able to do that on-scene assessment then is something that would normally be done in the hospital setting. We take that out of the equation, do it in the home, and help people be able to stay in their own homes and out in the community then. Another goal is to reduce the use of force. And we want to make sure that no one is injured when responding to these calls. We want to make sure that community members are safe and that those that are responding are safe as well. The co-responders, again, are really a fantastic resource that in the past was not available to people out in the community. People tend to call 911 when they're looking for that immediate response. They need something, they need some support immediately. They can't call a number and wait to go be seen by the hospital or be seen by a clinician at a later time. They need help right away. That's what the benefit of this 911 program is, because when people need help, that's what they tend to call 911. Officers are already responding to these calls, so now to respond in tandem with a mental health provider right there in the squad, it's just a fantastic benefit for everyone. I didn't add the fact that the officers that are responding to these calls, they're not in uniform. So they're in what we would call a soft uniform. They've got a polo shirt and they've got just regular blue navy pants, and that's how they respond. They do still have their utility belt on, but we want to set them apart physically so that community members recognize right away that they are not regular police officers. These are a specialized team. In addition to that, we have them operating out of an unmarked squad car. The benefit of that is too, because we don't want to bring stigma to people that are in crisis or are needing that support. Having a squad car pulled up outside your door or at your place of work, people, they just don't want that associated with their mental illness. And so it's nice for officers to be able to respond in this way in an unmarked car. The day-to-day actions, as I said, they're responding to these 911 calls. They're also doing those follow-up calls. So when it is a slower day, they're able to take the time to actually go out and do follow-up, whether it's follow-up on a call that they weren't able to get to because it occurred overnight, or perhaps it's a call that someone has made a phone call or sent an email into the team. Oftentimes, too, we're getting calls from community members that are familiar with the program, family members, and officers themselves that have come across people out in the community that would really benefit from the services that the co-responder team can do for them. They attend community meetings, and just today they were telling me that they had provided some services at a mental health facility in the past, and they came out and spoke with the residents as well as the staff members about the job that they do. So that was exciting for them to do follow-up for the whole organization. All right. So the co-responders, every time that they respond to a call, they fill out some paperwork for us. Of course, the mental health providers have a lot of extensive paperwork that they do. I'm not presenting that material. That's all HIPAA classified material. But I can tell you that when I met previously with Councilmember Cunningham, he had a really good point. Who's making these calls and looking for assistance for the community members that are facing a mental health crisis? And the largest percentage, friends and family. Those are the ones that are recognizing when there are issues at hand and when people are having, a tough time of it. They're the ones that are making the bulk of these calls. Also, in preceding those numbers, we've got service providers and then some of the shelters or halfway houses that are also calling on their clients. We do have self-reporting, of course, along with people that are passing by. So they might see something occurring on the street or out in their community, and so they're calling 911 as well when they're recognizing things that are happening. And who are the clients that they're serving? They're serving just a cross-section of all of us. Everybody out there in all walks of life, they all have issues with mental illness. And so we want to make sure that we're able to serve all communities, and we can say that we have been able to effectively work with every community that we've been out and responding to calls for. So some of the data that's been collected, so the program just started last September, and I wanted to provide you with just some of that information too. They responded to 326 contacts, and during that time frame, that would be from September just through this past April, 277 of those calls were for adults, and then 49 of the calls were for juveniles. So I didn't recognize the fact that we'd have so much opportunity to work closely with a lot of other agencies with this program too. So it's been exciting to be welcomed into a lot of different facilities and working closely with the public school system as well. When they're seeing kids in crisis, we're able to help. There were 109 assessments conducted by our COPE mental health providers. And in doing so, again, that would be treatment that people might receive at a clinician's office or at a hospital. We were just ready and available to do it right on site. There was one incident out of the 326 contacts that we've made. There was one incident involving a use of force. And in that situation, the client had missed a medication dosage, and the officer and the mental health provider actually called off the responding officers because they were familiar with the site. It was a location where some residents there, they struggle with mental illness. And so in responding, the officer was talking to the client, and the client was very upset and actually went after the officer, and the officer had to put him down onto the ground and put handcuffs on. And please note, though, he did not go to jail. Although there was an assault that occurred on the officer and the mental health provider clearly recognized that this gentleman really needed the support of the hospital and his clinician, and wanted to make sure that he was able to get there safely, which he did, and he received services then immediately that day. So out of all of these 326 contacts, 149 of those residents were able to stay in their homes. They were not taken to jail. They were not taken to the hospital. They remained on site in their homes. 96 of those folks were transported to the hospital or another care facility and were able to receive services immediately that day. And then 81 of those, they were gone upon arrival. So maybe they had moved on or they refused to come to the door. Please note on the graph that I will send to all of you, in none of these instances was anyone ever taken to jail. And that's significant. The recommendation that I have today is that we expand this program. I want to make sure that it continues in the 3rd and the 5th precinct, where we have 60% of the calls for service are in the 3rd precinct, again, the south side, the 5th precinct covering southwest and downtown. 60% of all of our EDP calls. So I'd really like to expand this program beyond 3s and 5s and bring it into the 1st precinct so we can help a significant number of people that are really in crisis in the downtown community as well. That is all I have.
Thank you for your presentation.
Absolutely.
Do any of my colleagues have questions for Inspector Wake? Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Inspector. I actually didn't recognize you at first, not in uniform. So well, thank you so much for this presentation to share with folks here. I actually am the one who requested this presentation because I wanted to make sure that we were staying plugged into the work that's happening as a pilot, and wanted to make sure that we're understanding how it's being implemented and the impact that it's making. So I actually have a few questions, but I'll just start with a two-part one. The first is, so what I've heard from you is that the process is when there's an EDP call, that a traditional squad with two officers will go out. Do they go out with their lights and sirens on for an EDP call? Because you talked about the co-responders not doing that, but what about the initial call?
Sure, that's a very good question. You know, if there's an immediate need for their quick response, say for example, if someone's holding a knife to their neck, or if somebody's got a weapon and they're threatening to injure somebody else or themselves, then the primary squad, that 2-person squad, would respond code 3 to that call.
Got it. Thank you. And then further, the initial responding officers are essentially making the call as to whether or not a co-responder is needed for that particular call. What mechanisms really are in place to help prevent those officers becoming gatekeepers to the services? Because you had mentioned, that folks are just kind of skipping over now and calling directly to them, but that's really based on personality, not policy. So I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about the mechanisms to help prevent that gatekeeping.
Sure, absolutely. So they monitor both radio channels. For a portion of the day, both the 3rd and the 5th precinct are on the same radio channel, so they're just monitoring the one. But then as the day progresses, they go into different radio channels. They do monitor those, as well as having their squad computer that they can remove from their squad and put at their desk. So they're always monitoring the calls for service this way as well. And then, of course, they both have their cell phones, and dispatch knows to get in touch with them whenever there's an EDP call available.
Great, thank you. I'll let my colleagues ask some questions.
Thank you, and I'll note that we've been joined by Councilmember Gordon, and I believe he has a question.
Well, thank you very much, and appreciate you letting me participate in the committee. This is something that I was very interested in, and am still very interested in, but it's getting it started. I'm curious about the pie chart and the 149 people who remained at home, and how that might compare to some kind of a control group, or maybe what happened in other precincts, or what was happening in these precincts prior to that.
Sure.
The fact that there were no arrests makes me think this has been successful. I know in the report we don't have anything to compare it to, but could you maybe share what you think may have been happening in the past to that population?
Sure, certainly. I would have to get those numbers for you so I could do a comparison. It's tough because this is something that wasn't provided a year prior. So comparing maybe a little bit apples to oranges, but I definitely see the value in that. I would guess that a good chunk of the people probably went to the hospital, and a smaller segment probably went to jail in certain cases. It's a case-by-case basis, of course, but as far as doing something that would expedite the process a little bit, and knowing that officers aren't able to provide some of the services, they certainly don't have the resources and the skill set to provide some of the management plans that they're able to provide people. When you've got folks that are maybe experiencing suicidal ideation, and they're talking in a recent case, we had a young man that was talking about killing himself with a kitchen knife. And so what the team does then is they help problem solve with not only the client himself, but also with the entire family. And they were able to provide them with a lockbox. So, we didn't want them to lose all of the knives in the home, because they need their knives and cutlery for their day-to-day tasks in the home. So they were able to give them a lockbox to put all of the knives inside the lockbox. And so this is common practice of what they do. And I would say frequently in a situation similar to that, officers might feel as though it's the safest environment for that person, because they are struggling with suicidal ideation and considering a method as to how they might kill themselves. Officers may take that person directly to the hospital for services. But again, bringing in this additional resource is allowing people to problem solve on site, take more time with people, and come up with safety plans for not only the client, but the whole family, and they're able to safely stay in the home.
Well, that certainly sounds very positive and excellent. And I'm curious if EDP calls are flagged in our system, if we could look at how things have gone in the 4th precinct or the 2nd precinct in terms of EDP calls, and compare it with the pilot areas, that might give us an indication too.
And what would you like them to compare? Like what the results of those calls?
Yeah, so
Sure.
if we could just generally look and see that, there's a trend that more EDP calls in the area of the pilot study resulted in less instances of use of force, or
Sure.
less hospitalization, or less arrests.
Okay.
That'd be interesting information to have.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to remember that this program began with a lot of community advocates, some of whom continue to remain involved, like STAMP, the Barbara Schneider Foundation, And I remember I remember a very late evening in the civil rights offices with Councilmember Gordon, Chief Harrington, people from multi-jurisdictions, Hennepin County attorneys and court workers, and people who really wanted to help solve this issue. I also really greatly appreciate, I think we all appreciate the personal investment that you've taken and interest that you've taken in this as a pilot, and your help in getting it off the ground. I wanted to also acknowledge that while we can't really take a motion that goes into the budget yet, that Councilmember Gordon and I feel strongly about this project, and will continue to work on it and try to make it more than a pilot and expand it to more of the city as it's needed. I am curious, my one small question is simply on the hours. Do you find that the hours 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. are the best hours based on, I assume it was based on data, and when these reports come in? I also happen to know from the 911 presentations that the busiest hour for 911 is 3 to 4 p.m. and that maybe this also coincides then nicely with schools. But could you share a little bit about why the hours are as such and what it might take to run a 24-hour operation?
Sure. Those hours were selected for a few different reasons. So initially, Monday through Friday, the calls for service that come in, that's generally when they're coming in. That's when the bulk of those 911 calls for EDP services, that's when they're happening. In addition to that, the bulk of the calls as far as time of day are generally from 11 a.m. until about 9 p.m. That's when the greatest volume of calls comes in. So we very intentionally selected 10 a.m. so that they can come in, review calls for service from the previous night or potentially from the weekend, and then hit the street and participate on calls and help out. They work an 8-hour shift because I just get more hours from people when we do that. And I'm sure they would love 10s, but I would prefer keeping them, boots on the ground one more day a week. I think that's pretty valuable. I think in the future, if we were to provide a 24-hour service, I think that would be fantastic in the entire city, would be my preference. And if we were to do that, we would need a significant number of personnel to do that, to make it happen, considering days off and such. You'd have to build a really significantly sized unit of both patrol officers as well as mental health providers. But if we could just bring it to all the precincts, I think there's a critical need out in the community. These 911 calls will continue to come in whether we have this program or not. And there is a significant gap in services provided to this community that we're getting called upon to provide either way. Why not bring in additional resources to really serve the community well? And in doing that, I think this program fits that need.
Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Inspector Waite. My question is, how long is the pilot program? And, you talk about expansion. Is there willingness on part of other precincts to participate in this project, this pilot as well?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. All of the precincts would love to be involved in it and have the opportunity to have a team of their own that could be responsive to the needs of their own precinct community members. So absolutely, there's definitely a desire for that. I'm sorry,
how long is the pilot?
I believe the contract ends in August.
Of 2018?
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I expressed this when we met and just wanted to reiterate my concerns that this is not being expanded to the fourth precinct in North Minneapolis. It makes me wonder how many folks are going to jail in North Minneapolis rather than getting the support that they need, like they might be getting through this co-responder model. Sure. And so I was wondering if you could explain why it's not being proposed to be expanded to North Minneapolis. Sure. And also, is there a plan, long-term plan, or and also how much would it cost to expand it to the 4th precinct? Because I know that's needed and that is really, really wanted.
Absolutely. It would be valuable for all the precincts. And having worked quite a bit on the north side, I would love to bring it to the north side community as well. So originally the pilot was in the 3rd precinct and the 5th precinct because that's where the bulk of the calls were at that time. Again, 60% of all the calls for EDPs are occurring in 3s, 5s, and downtown. So there's just a smaller volume of calls. That's why it wasn't originally brought to the north side and northeast. Is there a need? Absolutely. There's a need nationwide for a program such as these, and I would love to see it happen. As far as the contract goes, originally it was built on providing the resources for just the 2 mental health providers. I would say, how much would it cost us? I can't tell you exactly. I'd have to look into that because we'd have to consider the staff from MPD as well as the staff from COPE and the other resources needed, such as just the office space, the squads, and computers. We can make it happen, though.
I would love to see that. I know that the data shows a concentration in another part of town, but and you've been up there on the north side. I'm concerned about how is it being coded? Are we,
Sure.
Is there bias that's getting in the way of seeing folks, Black and brown folks as going like an EDP call? So I have some further questions about that. But
I'll look into that for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very
absolutely.
much.
And Councilmember Ellison.
Just wanted to echo Councilmember Cunningham in saying that, I want to note that Northeast and North Minneapolis, while 2 different neighborhoods, are both working class neighborhoods where the stigma of, being in the middle of a mental health crisis, folks might not be calling and saying that that's what they're experiencing and that that's what their family's experiencing. And so making sure that we have a way, to Councilmember Cunningham's point, to sort of coach people in learning that they can call for that reason. Because I have a hard time believing that, folks are just suffering less with mental health in those neighborhoods, and more. My experience tells me that more that stigma is preventing folks from reaching out for that kind of service. So just wanted to name that and hopefully push us to develop some metrics that aren't voluntary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Cunningham.
Sorry, just wanted to say one last thing, is that really when we look at expanding this to North Minneapolis, building on Councilmember Ellison's point, there's going to be a lot of trust building that needs to happen, because I know that on the north side, it's like if something's going on, you don't call the cops. Like that's how people feel. Don't call the cops. And so, again, that's kind of where I'm wondering if there might be some gaps in the data because of that. And so as we look, I think there's going to have to be a very intentional additional layer of trust building that if we call the cops, we are not going to end up dead.
Right.
So.
And we'll definitely look into COPE's numbers as well, because people are calling COPE separately from calling 911. And that is another resource that people are, they're utilizing every day. So we can look at their numbers too, because that's going to tell you, give you kind of a different perspective on when people are calling aside from 911.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much,
You're
Inspector.
welcome.
Inspector Wade, it sounded like you were saying that as part of the cost, we would need to consider additional patrol officers as well as the co-responders. Can you explain why that would be? Because it seems like there would be a squad responding to a 911 call in the absence of a co-responder program. So why the budget need for additional patrol officers?
Because the co-responder, the mental health provider, needs a partner. And so that's how they work. They work as a team, the mental health provider alongside that police officer. And it's a really unique situation in that they're operating in a squad car, working side by side for their entire shift. And so we need that body to fill that gap. Will there always be the patrol staff, the 2-person squad responding? Like you said, that's kind of the protocol. But again, not always. The more time they're spending in the community, the more they get to know people, and they are frequently now responding on their own. Just that mental health provider and the COPE and the police officer as well.
Thank you. I have one closing comment, but before I'll throw back to Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. And in the presentation that we can see, but it wasn't, I guess, shared, The recommendation is to add one team to include one precinct, and it includes a police officer, a mental health professional, a squad car, 2 computers, and a phone. Do you happen to know what the total cost of that is?
I'm sorry, I don't. I'd have to refer to Robin McPherson, our numbers guru extraordinaire, for that. But
Okay,
I can get you that too.
Pardon me?
I can get you that information.
Well, that would be excellent, and that would also give us an indication about what we think it would be to add a team per precinct, because there'll be a definite cost
Sure.
that we could assist by then. And we could also, I guess my other question is, if there was the funding available to add 2 precincts, would we have the capacity to hire, train, and equip those teams next year?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's mostly a funding issue in terms of expanding it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So we have that to look forward to in our budgeting conversations coming up over the summer and into the fall. I just want to note that I think it's very, very important that we be pursuing strategies that are designed to de-escalate, that are designed to not end up in jail, and that are designed to hopefully keep people in their homes and help people go about their lives. And so to the extent that the data suggests that this is working, I find that very promising, and I hope that we continue to dig in to figure out what aspects of this program are working best, what things can be improved as we roll it out to other places. But thank you very much for your presentation today.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much.
That brings us to our final item, which is the staff report on the use of ketamine by HCMC and the role of the police department in those interactions. We will begin by opening the floor to public comments. As I noted previously, we'll be taking comments from speakers in the order they are registered. We already have many people registered. And if there are folks here who wish to speak on this topic and haven't yet registered, please do so now with the clerk, Kelly. And again, if you prefer to submit written comments rather than speaking today, you can give those written comments to the clerk. The clerk has forms available for folks to use if you would prefer to submit written comments. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to begin, although we have, I think, more than 10 people who want to speak. So out of consideration to everybody else, we're budgeting a half an hour. So please try to keep your comments brief to the extent that they can. We have a timer set up, and we will make use of it. And then we ask each person to surrender the podium when their time has expired. Before I call the first speaker, I do want to note that the report that we're going to receive today is merely to provide an update. This was something that we didn't feel it was appropriate to have a public safety meeting with this being the topic on everybody's mind without having some discussion about it. But there is no action expected to result from the report of this committee today. I'll note that on Monday, the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee did give a staff direction to have the Office of Police Conduct Review complete its report and to return in July with its findings. So that work will continue. That action has been taken. And today's status report is to give this committee, which addresses public safety, a better understanding of where we are today on the use of ketamine and policy changes by the police chief as a result of the draft report. So with that, I will call the first speaker, and Vice President Jenkins.
No, just to add to your update, the staff direction also called for an independent review of the report when it's complete as well.
Thank you. With that, I'll call the first speaker, and the first person registered is Michelle Gross. Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes. Michelle Gross, I'm president of Communities United Against Police Brutality, and council members and Chair Fletcher. We want to talk today a little bit about our own experiences related to this particular issue of coerced drugging of people. We're concerned both with the coerced drugging aspect as well as the particular use of this particular drug. What I want to mention is we have a 24-hour hotline. People call our hotline frequently with cases of what they consider to be police brutality. And a few years ago, we started to hear about people telling us that the police made them drug us, this kind of thing. And you start to hear these things, and at first you think, you got to be kidding me. You know, it doesn't even seem credible. But bit by bit, we began to hear more and more of these cases. And when people come to us and, call our hotline and so forth, we then invite them to a meeting. They get to tell their whole story to us. And then we begin to do work on that case. And what people have told us pretty consistently is that the incidents in which they were coercively injected involved verbal disagreements, verbal objection to the police conduct that they were experiencing, but not physical resistance. And so this was of deep concern to us. These were people that were strapped down on a gurney, had been injured, and things like that. And then the other component that we heard about, which was deeply concerning, is that these people would wake up hours later in a hospital or in a jail cell, injured, but not remembering how they were injured. So that is of deep concern because the particular drug ketamine does have an amnesiac effect. And so it makes people forget what happened to them, which is pretty appalling. This to us represents a violation of people's constitutional rights, particularly, the Fourth Amendment right to privacy and the right that inures from that, which is under the Patient Bill of Rights, the right to refuse care. And we have a very strong Patient Bill of Rights in Minnesota statute 144.651, if anybody wants to look it up. And people who are able to articulate should not be given drugs forcibly against their will. That's a deep concern to us. We see this as being very connected to the previous presentation, which, by the way, thank you for that presentation and for the very thoughtful questions that happened. We see this as deeply related to that. We support the demand for, or the community demand really, for not just co-responder models, but eventually, hopefully, an alternate responder model for most calls. And so we are really pleased about that. But the question then becomes, if these people are having, mental health issues or there's some kind of thing going on, why are they being forcibly injected rather than being addressed in a mental health capacity? And so that's of deep concern to us. Again, our experiences show that this is perhaps more widespread even than that report acknowledges. And so finally, our call is for an independent investigation, and that means an investigation outside of internal affairs and even outside of the OPCR, which has done a great job, allegedly with this report. We haven't seen it, but it sounds like it's good. But we wanted to see like a panel of some type pulled together to really do a real investigation on this. Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Next up is Dave Bicking.
Hi, my name is Dave Bicking, 4200 Cedar Avenue South in Minneapolis. There's an awful lot we don't know yet. This is just a draft report, but the draft report does indicate that this practice goes back at least to 2012, growing to 62 incidents by 2017. Big question is what was happening in between. The chief says that he first heard about this in mid-May of this year. Soon after that, he issued a new and much improved policy. That much is good. But was the chief truly unaware all that time? If so, the communication in the police department is badly broken. Were all the officers and their immediate supervisors just unaware that this might perhaps be a controversial practice? Did it never go up the chain of command? And likewise, the communication with the council, particularly this committee, is badly broken if something like this has been going on for at least 6 years. It shouldn't come to us from the Star Tribune. The OPCR was clearly made aware of this before mid-May of this year. I understand there were concerns raised before the beginning of this year, but the public heard nothing until the draft report was leaked to the public through the Star Tribune. And in the meantime, this practice continued. What's going on here? There's a serious breakdown in oversight, which frankly does not surprise me, given the history of the OPCR, the Minneapolis Police Department, and the City Council. You say you won't be taking any actions today, but I would strongly urge you to take one action, one directive that could be done by this committee immediately. And that is, even as you wait for the final report, you should direct the OPCR and the Minneapolis Police Department to proactively notify the people who were injected with ketamine. Many of them are probably unaware of what happened to them, as Michelle said before. That's the very nature of a date rape drug. I don't think it's good for the city to sit back and wait for lawsuits to be filed, though I'm sure there will be. Councilmember Schrader was quoted in the paper to the effect of, your responsibility is to the people of the city, not to the city government. And I think this is a point where you could illustrate that in a very dramatic fashion by proactively contacting people and letting them know what happened to them. Release the records. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take Tamara Russell, and then after that, Loretta Van Pelt.
Hi, my name is Tamara Russell. I'm here to talk about my son. He was a vulnerable adult. He had PTSD and TBI, and I would like to see criminal justice reform. He went to jail he was not a hardened criminal. He had to go to jail for one marijuana cigarette. He lived in North Minneapolis, a couple of blocks from where Jamar Clark was killed. And just because he was biracial, they would never take him to detox. I took him to hospitals several times, and they wouldn't even keep him. They put him in a padded cell. I talked to the social worker. I called there at 7 in the morning, and they released him. They would not keep him in the hospital. That we need more mental health and criminal justice reform. People with substance abuse problems and mental health just deteriorate in jail. That's all they do is deteriorate. And we need help. We need help for mental health and substance abuse and affordable housing. He had to live there because of a minor criminal record. He never was a drug dealer. He never was a sex offender. It was always minor offenses because he'd always have a public defender that would tell him to plead guilty. And he went to jail many times. They'd even call me and tell me he was having panic attacks. I got him a lawyer, a mental health worker. They would not do anything. He went to jail several times for minor offenses just because he had a public defender. We need criminal justice reform and mental health. I think it costs more to keep them in jail than to send them to treatment.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next up is Loretta Van Pelt. And after that, Keith McCarron.
Hi, I'm Loretta Van Pelt, and I'm with Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar. And if this was anything, our demand has always been for community control of the police, and this has very much been an example of why we need that. Why we need that now, because to find out that like our neighbors, our family members are getting drugged by the police is just wrong. And we demand transparency. We want more than just a little report. We demand transparency. We want to know who ordered people to get shot up with ketamine. Why were they shot? Why did they make that decision? All that. We demand transparency when it comes to this, because this is very appalling. I'm a taxpayer in this city, and I'm appalled that my money was used to do that to my neighbors, to friends, to family, that we need transparency, and that's what I'm demanding and what we demand.
Thank you for your testimony. Keith McCarron.
Councilpersons, I just want to clarify, I worked at 911 during the time that this evidently took place, and we were never told one incident of this occurring. So this has been covered up from the very beginning. There was never any notes and any calls about administration of ketamine. So I have a number of different questions. I also worked on the mental health roundtable, which liaisons between the mental health community and Minneapolis Police Department. We've had CIT trained officers for well over a decade. So my question would be, this is being proposed as this was used as a mental health protocol. And I would say that this was not being used as a mental health protocol, that this was being used as a punitary protocol for people that did not act as the police wished them to act, done at the hands of EMS. So my question is this. We've heard from HCMC, who has made the excuse that this has been psychological treatment, but we haven't heard anything from North Memorial. And so is this also a practice of North Memorial to operate in 4th Precinct with this kind of impunity? We've also understood that COPE has been on some of these calls. And so has COPE been standing by observing these people being injected with ketamine, knowing mental health protocols and not saying anything? And I want to know why that's happening. Why is no one saying anything and covering up everything until the whistleblower steps forward? I assure you didn't hear of it. I didn't hear of it. I worked right down there. And the other thing is, if the police were aware of it and the EMS were aware of it, was fire aware of it? Was fire called on these calls? How do they know? If we have body camera images of these events, those officers that were caught on body camera using this medication inappropriately need to be terminated. This is not a training issue. This is not a, oops, I didn't think of anything occurring issue. This is harassment. This is illegal treatment of human rights of our citizens, whether they're mentally ill or whether they're just not cooperative with the police. So I really want it to be noted that if they're CIT officers, they know right away what they're doing is wrong according to their protocols. EMS knows it's wrong. North knows it's wrong. Fire knows it's wrong. If you're putting people at a risk for heart failure and officers are calling for intubation, they're not ones that should be calling for intubation of patients.
Thank you for your testimony. Next is Kathy Check.
Hello, my name is Kathy Zeck. I live at 1313 44th Avenue North in Minneapolis. I am with the group STAMP, also known as Safety, Triage, and Mental Health Providers. First of all, I will give kudos to the chairman, council members, Councilmember Gordon also, and Inspector Wake. We have come a very, very long way with a whole lot of work. I too have some issues with the ketamine. I'm probably saying it wrong. I was told by an individual who lives in the 5th precinct that when the officers come, they will throw her on the floor and pile up on her. This has happened before the co-responder. This has happened since the co-responder started. She says, if they're nice, they'll throw me on the couch. She was given the ketamine, and I had a problem with even believing this. I am an RN, and the physician's desk reference, I doubt, subscribes to this as a use for ketamine. Yes, it is used for depression, but there is a full evaluation, not by a nurse, but by a physician who can order this medication, monitor this medication, and even more so, knows about drug interactions. The individual that I spoke with needed to be intubated. She did lose consciousness. She woke up in the ICU. She was there, I can't remember if it's probably several weeks, because you don't go from unconscious, intubated, just to being with it. She is terrified of this happening again. There is no way this should be delivered in an emergency on ethical matters, but also on medical health matters. These folks do not know drug interactions, what other medications these folks are taking. Yes. Also, just a little bit on the co-responder, there are times when officers refuse to refer people. And are these times they're given ketamine? I don't know. Could be, could not be. There are some gaps. And of course, it's a new program. But I'm hoping that this will work through as it goes on. Once again, thank all of you. I think this is just awesome that this is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up is Toya Minister Woodbind. Sorry if I'm misreading that. And after that, Maurice Floyd.
Good afternoon. I'm Minister Toya Woodland. I'm from Christ Temple Apostolic Church. I am so tired of coming to these council meetings and begging people like you to consider people who look like me as human beings. It just appalls me that anybody would think that it's okay to drug another human being against their will. And for us to have an investigation around the subject, it's wrong. It's just wrong. And the people who did these things should be fired from their jobs immediately. And this practice should be stopped. I don't understand how anybody could think that's okay. In this world, in this day and age, it hurts my heart that these practices are going on. And I don't want to cry, but it just hurts my heart that these practices are going on, that it's more African American people that are being drugged, people who look like me. And I'm concerned about this program that the inspector was talking about, because the data is accurate. It didn't include people in the 4th precinct at all. So I'm concerned about that. When I heard about this, I'm so emotional. When I heard about these people being sedated, I immediately went into prayer, because I'm a minister, right? And I prayed about the situation. But I can't understand how it is that we get to this point, how it is that anyone could think it's okay to drug anyone and at all. I just don't understand. So I'm here to say that I want justice for the people who are drugged. I want justice for those who were drugged. I want the people who were doing the drugging. I want them to be fired. And I think that there should be reparations for those people. I think there should be not reparations, but I think that there should be I'm sorry. I am so emotional about this. I don't usually be that emotional, but I just think that this is just so wrong, and it hurts my heart to the core that this happened at all. And I'm tired of us having to beg you guys to treat Black people or people of color like we're human, because we are human. And I'm concerned that I know that it wasn't white people that were being drugged. I know they weren't being drugged. And if it was a small amount. We are human. We are people. And it's time that we stop being treated as if we weren't. I'm tired of coming to council meetings and telling you guys and begging you guys to treat us like we're human. Because we are human. Why do we have to tell you that? Why do you have to beg you to act and treat us right? Why is that? We're people. We're beautiful people.
Thank you for your testimony.
There's no reason why I have to come to the council meeting after council meeting and keep begging people to treat me like I'm somebody special. Begging you people to treat me like I'm a human being. Damn it, I'm a human being.
Maurice Floyd is next.
I'm Maurice, and I'm here to testify. Man over there, he really opened my eyes up to the incubation, how officers are doing this, and everyone I've heard spoke so far are just people that are somewhat advocates of those that have been victims of that. I personally myself am a victim. On March 23rd of this year, and I do have videotape, I have footage and everything, but it seems that all the way across the board, and this incident occurred, officers actually drugged me, and this has been something that has been happening to me for some time in Minnesota. I've had a vehicle taken from me, called down the impound. For 30 days, they told me it wasn't there. Then on day 30, it was. I've lived in Minneapolis public housing, and I am a recovering addict, and it's been a real struggle for me to try to stay clean. I was clean from December 23rd all the way till February 27th, the year 2007, all the way to the year 2017. I was constantly harassed, dealing with the police, dealing with my vehicle. In 2012, someone hit my vehicle, and I'm living in Minneapolis public housing. They tell me I have to go get a police report. Police refuse to give me a police report, and I come down here to the commissioner, and I finally did get one for that incident in 2012. But in 2017, when they basically continued to just knock off my mirror, scratch it, dent it at will, I went down to the management of Minneapolis public housing. They told me I needed a police report. Again, the police refused to give me a report. Once I sued them for the $3,000 worth of damage, they decided to give me $300 because I just wouldn't accept $100. I don't know, I want to take you guys back to a little bit of history of if you can do the research yourself, Frank Wright hearing in 1974, where they were talking about gang stalking and, harassment of individuals. I am a target. I experience this every day of my life. I've struggled to stay clean. Today I only have 14 months when I should actually be celebrating 14 years. Stress is one of the biggest problems that cause individuals to use drugs. And I'm totally tired of being stressed out, harassed, and followed by the police and given tickets. I just did STS service yesterday for 4 tickets. They broke one, said I was 8 feet 3 inches away from the curb, and I was actually 8 feet on the money, but I was given a ticket, and I did do that. I'm a law-abiding individual. I don't harm anyone, but I do have videotape of the incident, of what they did to me, tased me, stomped me, and then incubated me and put me in the hospital. And as they actually simultaneously evicted me from Minneapolis public housing, refused to release me from jail after my bail was posted for an entire week. But I must stay of good cheer regardless of that. That's my duty. Do yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Curtis Avent, and then we have Maddie Harrison. Is Curtis here?
Well, my name is Curtis Avent. I live at 530 Jinx. Some specific information in regards to excited delirium. The chief proponent and advisor of excited delirium is Dr. Jeffrey Ho, who is the director of MS at Hennepin County Medical Center. He has published numerous amounts of papers. He has specifically, there's one in 2007, how to respond to excited delirium. because you as law enforcement officers are often required to control suspects in various stages of agitation, it is important for you to understand that some of these subjects will be in the state of excited psychological stress. In 2007, ABC did a report because there were multiple deaths in police custody in regards to excited delirium. There is, up until that point, been nothing in any medical journal, nothing in any medical dictionary to support this excited delirium. And often cases, and in most cases, excited delirium is only pronounced after death of a subject in police custody. So you have an individual who was a sheriff who works in Hennepin County Medical, who has been spreading this theory of excited delirium to cops nationwide. With previous to him and some of his colleagues' work, there is no known or understood idea or diagnosis of excited delirium. That these cases under police distress or police abuse or death in police custody are the only times that they have been able to diagnose this excited delirium. So this basically seems, in my opinion, that this is an excuse or something built around a narrative to explain why these individuals are dying in police custody and what these things are to use for these individuals. Eric Balaban of the American Civil Liberties Union argued in 2007 that excited delirium was not recognized, again, by any American Medical Association or the American Psychological Association, and that the diagnosis served as means of whitewashing what may be excessive use of force and inappropriate control techniques by officers during arrests. This was back in 2007. We're talking about 11 years later. This is something that was addressed publicly on national news and by the American Civil Liberties Union. There should be no question what you should do in your report or how this should be handled, especially from the lead individual that you guys are getting information from, both medically as part of your police force and works for Hennepin County, who are in cahoots with the officers that are collectively drugging our citizens. Symptoms of this excited delirium are agitation, delirium, and sweating. Now, differential diagnoses, I'm going to wrap this up very quickly.
Thank you.
Differential diagnoses are low blood pressure, low blood sugar, heat stroke, thyrostosis, which I'm not even sure that I'm pronouncing, paranoid schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. So the amount of individuals who could be listed or being drugged under these could also have a number of these other effects, and by no means would you, by law or by any other service, give these individuals ketamine, put them into a place where they might be intubated, and the death rate about individuals with ketamine, if you haven't researched that already, can put you into respiratory stress and to the point where 50% of these individuals have to be intubated. Do your research, please. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to call on Maddie Harrison, and then I have 3 additional people signed in, and I'm going to ask if my colleagues would mind extending the time for those 3 people. So that would be, in an additional 9 minutes. Can we do that?
I would like to move an additional 10 to add another 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So Maddie Harrison, and then following that we have Molly Wetherall, Nakima Levy-Pounds, and Linda G.
Hi, I'm Maddie Harrison. I'm a resident of South Minneapolis. I was really disgusted and disturbed when I read this report in the Star Tribune. And I think there's been a lot of people that have been asking how something like this could happen. And I think, like Curtis just brought up, the fact that the director of Emergency Medical Services of HCMC is also an active duty sheriff in Minnesota is disgusting and appalling, and is absolutely a conflict of interest and a conflation of 2 entities that should be completely separate. And it totally explains how something like this scandal could be happening. I don't understand how we've gotten to the point that we have our hospitals under the control of the police as well. That's terrifying. And Dr. Jeffrey Ho has been doing research on ketamine for the past decade in pre-hospital settings. So this is not new to him. He's been using vulnerable people that are being arrested by the Minneapolis Police Department to conduct his own research, which is extremely unethical and terrifying. I think that having a cop in charge of our emergency medical services creates a culture where he's most likely training his EMS workers to take commands from the police and to participate in a toxic police culture that we've been struggling with in this country forever. And that explains how medical workers could be like taking commands from officers and injecting innocent people that do not need this drug with a date rape drug. I think another concern that needs to be looked into is what's happening to these people after they're sedated. Again, the fact that it is known as a date rape drug, that people often suffer from amnesia after they're injected with ketamine. I'm concerned about what kind of abuse is happening to these people after they've been injected. I know too many people that have been date raped, and I know too many people that have been sexually assaulted and raped by police. So that needs to be looked into. And finally, like, we need to do something. We cannot have this conflation of police running our medical services. That's absolutely unethical. We need to know who these officers are that have been commanding EMS workers to inject people. We need to know who the EMS workers are, and all those people need to be fired. I also think we need a commitment from City Council to not add any new police officers to the budget this upcoming year. And with that money that would be used for new officers, I would like to see that put into alternate responders for medical health crisis so that this can be handled in a way that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next is Molly Wetherall.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I live at 1823 13th Avenue South, which is in Ventura Village. So I want to express concern with the drugging of people and also with the specific risks of ketamine. This drug is classified as a date rape drug, as has been mentioned before, and it is particularly risky for people with heart problems or who are at risk of psychosis. And according to the published works of Jeffrey Ho, people have gone into cardiac arrest and died from being administered this drug pre-hospital. And when experts in emergency medicine published concerns with the high percentage of patients who were being intubated, which is when a tube is forced down your trachea, it's painful, to keep the airway open, these medical experts expressed concern about the rate of intubation because it's incredibly high for people being administered ketamine. And that is indicative of the fact that it's in a pre-hospital environment, and it also is done with no clinical assessment, so no determination of the risks, which is why people die due to those risks pre-hospital. I want to know, as Maddie expressed, how many people were brought directly to jail after being drugged? How many convictions have resulted from arrests of this nature? And Jeffrey Ho published a work last year that between 2014 and 2015, 545 people were drugged pre-hospital because they were agitated. And he narrowed down that pool to roughly 150 people who were incredibly agitated, and then stated that from that pool, only 50 were brought to HCMC. So I want to know where everyone else is going. And I also want to ask this committee to connect with St. Paul's Public Safety Committee. According to the Chief Medical Officer in the press conference that happened recently, this is happening at Regions as well, which tracks with Ho's research, which is co-authored by people from Regions, specifically Kristen Engebretson, Paul Nystrom actually is HCMC, and then there's one other guy, John Cole. So I would ask that you all look into these people. And then, as Curtis named, excited delirium is not an academic observation, it's an ideological statement that people deserve to die at the hands of police. And so when the chief medical officer of HCMC is talking about excited delirium, he's making an ideological statement and saying he's going to back up his buddies who are cops, who are experimenting on people's bodies. And I would like to see everyone who has been authoring research with Ho and experimenting on vulnerable people's bodies to be fired. And I would also like to affirm that we don't need any more cops. And this is important to keep in mind with the upcoming budget. Additionally, if anyone was strapped down to a gurney and drugged, that's really problematic. And we deserve access to all of the evidence of that, and people deserve to take civil lawsuits against the police and HCMC for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Nakima Levy-Pounds.
Good afternoon. I want to first just applaud all of the people who showed up today because you care about your fellow human beings in the city of Minneapolis and in Hennepin County. And particularly, I think it was noble of the person who experienced trauma from being injected and all of the police abuses to stand up here. It takes a great deal of courage to do that. One of the things that struck me when I first read the Star Tribune article talking about the role of the police in urging medical professionals to use ketamine is that this is yet another example of unchecked police power in the city of Minneapolis. And unfortunately, it's just the tip of the iceberg. I remember coming here in 2015 and talking to city council members, as well as the mayor at that time, about the fact that we need comprehensive criminal justice reform in the city of Minneapolis. Police abuses are happening on a regular basis. And it's not as if government leaders aren't aware of this. You have enough video evidence, you have enough lawsuits that have been settled on behalf of police officers against victims for years, tens of millions of dollars. And so the evidence and the information is there, but the political will has not been there to do something about it. So what we are asking all of you to do is to take this seriously, to not just issue statements to the press saying, we want a third-party investigation, hoping to sweep this under the rug, because some people, not all of your hearts are in this from my perspective, because if they were, these issues would have been remedied a long time ago. It should not take people being killed at the hands of the police in order for you all to do something about what is going on. Since we held the press conference a few days ago, I have received at least 3 calls from emails, from members of the public talking about being drugged with ketamine, talking about being forced into studies that they did not agree with at HCMC surrounding ketamine, and they are traumatized as a result of what has happened. Some of these people have mental health issues. Many are vulnerable. And at the end of the day, when I think about what's happening here, I feel like we're in the twilight zone. I mean, it just the nature of the culture here that would allow police officers to feel comfortable giving instruction to medical professionals to drug people. So we are asking for a number of things. Number one, of course, we're asking for a third-party independent investigation. We do not trust local agencies or individuals to conduct an investigation. We're asking for a credible entity outside of the state of Minnesota to evaluate and examine what is really happening here. Beyond that, we have asked for reparations for the people who have been victimized through this scandal. It's unfortunate that people felt uncomfortable calling the police before, and now we have to feel uncomfortable calling for emergency medical services because we don't know what's going to happen to us. Absolutely outrageous. I also want to add that we're looking for information on the race and the gender and the zip codes of and age of the people who have been victimized. I would argue that many of these people have come from some of our most underserved communities. And that is an absolute tragedy. If this was happening in Southwest Minneapolis, it wouldn't have even come to this. It wouldn't have taken 3 years to figure out that something was terribly wrong. And that's a manifestation of the inequities that continue to persist in the city of Minneapolis. So at the end of the day, we're here standing in solidarity. We're asking you guys to take this to heart, to think about the people who've been impacted and to really do something in this instance, and to have sweeping criminal justice reforms in the city of Minneapolis and to balance the power of the police. And part of how you do that is firing those officers who were involved in this scandal. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Linda G.
Hi, I'm an attorney, and I've gotten involved with a lot of criminal justice matters because I developed a ministry because pastors would ask me to visit people in jail. So I've been in all the local jails. And I just wanted to make about three comments. First, my observation from the suburbs is that one issue that we have is very often our police will dump people into Minneapolis or St. Paul. Any person that they consider to be somehow not belonging in that community, they will just physically transport them to HCMC or Regions Hospital and just dump them there. Okay, so I definitely see, I actually feel ashamed of that, okay, as a resident of Woodbury, Minnesota. And I don't think that these problems are all yours. I think that they're regional, and Minneapolis just is the place that people get dumped. And I do know of another man who was in Apple Valley, and the police dragged him and tased him and put him on the bus and told him to go back to Minneapolis, and he wanted to be in Apple Valley, but they said, no, you go back to Minneapolis. So I definitely see that these issues that we're having is regional. It involves 7 counties, not just Minneapolis. Another thing that I would say is the police definitely are trying to get information from people in the local jails because they don't have a good relationship with the community. So they're always trying to get information from the people. But if you are ever labeled a snitch, you are going to die. Your life is in danger if you are ever labeled a snitch in like any local jail. You cannot meet with anybody from local law enforcement. If they see you leave to talk to anybody in law enforcement as somebody who's in a cell, you get labeled snitch, okay? And your life is in danger. So I can totally see that ketamine being the kind of substance that it is, that the police would use that to get information from people that they would forget about. They answer questions. They'll forget that they answered them. They'll answer them truthfully. Ketamine is truth serum. So I can see that the police would have a huge incentive to use ketamine in order to get information from people about the community, what's going on. So I think I've been asking myself, why? And that's the only thing that really comes to my mind too, is getting information, and people forget about it. And also, there's a huge history in this country about medical experiments done on people of color. And I definitely, you read about African Americans and syphilis and not giving people drugs against syphilis and letting people just suffer and die. And I see that there are medical experiments being conducted on people of color, unofficial, illegal. And I think that the doctors involved should be reported to the medical board. There are other ways to sanction people. Doctors should not do that.
Thank you for your testimony. Was there anyone who intended to speak who has not spoken who we've missed? Seeing no one, I'd like to now recognize, I'm sorry. And this will be the final speaker. Please state your name.
I'd just like to know, why do emergency medical technicians even have a date rape drug? What is, and it should be illegal. It should be against city ordinance. Actually, it should be against state law, and it should be against federal law as well. That's basically all I had to say.
Okay. Thank you all for your testimony, and thank you all for being here today. At this time, I'd like to recognize the staff for their status report, and I'd like to note that we also extended an invitation to medical staff at HCMC to see if they could answer questions related to their area of expertise. The appropriate experts were not able to attend this meeting. Dr. John Pryor reiterated the county's commitment to conducting an independent review of the cases in the report. With that, I'll turn it over to Assistant Clerk Christian Rummelhoff.
Thank you. Chair Fletcher, committee members. I'm Christian Rummelhoff. I serve as the city's Director of Records and Information Management in the clerk's office. I'm here to provide a framework for the staff presentation about the investigation conducted by the Office of Police Conduct Review and its draft report. Director Corbell and of the Civil Rights Department and Deputy Chief Halverson from the Police Department are here to provide comments. Before they do, I'm here to say a few words about the availability of the draft report, which has been the subject of much media attention this past week. When my office was contacted last week with a request for access to the draft report, we began reviewing the classification of the data to determine what, if any, data is public and therefore subject to disclosure, and whether any data may be classified as other than public and therefore not subject to disclosure. As this body is aware, the city has equal obligations to ensure that public data is made available, but to prevent the disclosure of protected data. Over the last several days, we've received guidance from the City Attorney's Office and informal advice from the Minnesota Data Practices Office. We've concluded that the programmatic review work of the Office of Police Conduct Review, by its very nature of oversight, is, while in draft form, confidential or protected non-public data under Section 13.392 of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. The section pertains to internal auditing data, and it states, data, notes, and preliminary drafts of reports created, collected, and maintained by the internal audit offices of government entities or persons performing audits for governmental entities and relating to an audit or investigation are confidential data on individuals or protected non-public data until the final report has been published or until the audit or investigation is no longer pursued actively. As Director Corbel will explain, the Office of Police Conduct Review generated this draft as part of its audit of police procedures. As such, Minnesota Statute 13392 classifies the report as confidential or protected non-public data. The statute's important because it enables the OPCR to effectively perform its audits. And it's an important part of its oversight function of police conduct. So because of this classification, staff comments today must, of necessity, be limited to those items that can be publicly discussed without potentially releasing protected data. Once the report is finalized and published, it then becomes public data. We appreciate there's a staff directive which indicates the final report is to be submitted to this committee in July. Therefore, we would presume the report would be published at that time. So in order to ease public access and improve transparency, the city will publish the public portions of the final report as well as any related data, public data, to the city's website. We plan to use the same web address that we've used for other frequently requested data sets. And that web address is the city's website, www.minneapolismn.gov, and /police/records/frequent. And that will be available on the city's homepage as well. Interested members of the community can monitor that website for updates. So unless there are any questions about the data classification as I presented them, I'll yield the floor to Director Corbel for her comments.
If you could just repeat the last part of the website again, it's a little more slowly so we understand what it is. I got /police/records.
And then /frequent. So it's www.minneapolismn.gov/police/records/frequent. And we'll have a link on the front page of the city's website as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me butt in and be so rude.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Velma Corbel, and I'm the Director of Civil Rights here in the city of Minneapolis. In May of this year, the Office of Police Conduct Review, a division within the Civil Rights Department, released a working draft of a report that is the subject of this presentation. The report raised concerns about Minneapolis police officers allegedly instructing EMS personnel to administer a drug known as ketamine to individuals in the care of emergency surgeries. By way of background, the primary mission of the Office of Police Conduct Review is to assure that police services are delivered in a lawful and non-discriminatory manner. The office does this in two key ways. First, by investigating complaints of misconduct against Minneapolis police officers, and secondly, by conducting program reviews, audits, and research studies. In doing its program reviews or audits, the OPCR ordinance at Title IX, Chapter 172 provides that, quote, staff shall have full, free, and unrestricted access to the extent authorized by law to the records of the Minneapolis Police Department in order to conduct investigations of police misconduct, facilitate research and study projects for the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and conduct special reviews and programmatic reviews at the request of the mayor, city council, internal auditor, city departments, or boards and commissions, end quote. Reviews and audits for both the Police Conduct Oversight Commission and the Office of Police Conduct Review are performed by a single legal analyst. For this particular report, the legal analyst was assisted by a body camera analyst who transitioned into his new role in April of this year. The process for conducting a program review or audit that focuses on improving police services and ensuring that those services are delivered in a lawful manner is described in detail in the PCOC study process document. And I've made some copies available to the committee this afternoon, and there's also a copy that is available for the public to examine if they would like to do that. This document has been made available to the public since 2017, and in fact was actually briefed by Ryan Patrick, the legal analyst, to the PCOC in 2017. And this is the process that the Police Conduct Review Office used to conduct this present program audit. In its simplest terms, I would tell you that the way this works is that the analyst would produce a working draft of its process, of its program review document. After that working draft is created, the analyst then would seek additional information from those involved in the issue under review to provide context and a response to any unanswered questions. The working draft is then revised to include this feedback before any final draft report is issued. All contributors have an opportunity to review their responses, make corrections, and provide any final comments. The report is then only considered final when all contributors have had an opportunity to go through this process. A working draft is never a final draft. It is only after all of the corrections have been made that the report is considered final. The sequence of events that brought us to the production of this particular working draft are as follows. In the fall of 2017, at the request of the Minneapolis Internal Audit Department, the Office of Police Conduct Review staff reviewed body camera footage for the purposes of reviewing use of force incidents. During this review process, several instances were observed of individuals being injected with an unknown substance by emergency medical professionals. In early 2018, the Office of Police Conduct Review analysts notified the director of that office that they had observed these instances. And then the Office of Police Conduct Review's director reviewed the body camera footage. That director then requested that the staff research any relevant policies regarding the use of sedatives. The staff researched the policy, but the OPCR staff were unable to find any applicable MPD policy. In late February of 2018, the Office of Police Conduct Review Director notified me regarding her staff's observations. I then looked at some of the body camera video and requested that the staff in the Office of Police Conduct Review begin to conduct a review regarding the use of sedatives. At this point, the Office of Police Conduct Review analysts suspected the substance used in most of these cases was ketamine. Between late February and mid-May of 2018, the Office of Police Conduct Review reviewed reports dating back to 2010 to April 2018. The OPCR analysts retrieved police reports that contained the word ketamine and reviewed the corresponding body camera video if it was available. A total of 159 reports mentioning ketamine from 2010 to 2018 were reviewed, and a total of 8 incidents were observed to include instances of MPD-involved decision-making prior to sedation. In mid-May of this year, the civil rights staff met with the mayor's policy staff, and then on May 22nd to alert them that this draft report was in process. On May 22nd, the Civil Rights Department delivered hard copies of the draft report to a very small group of staff inside the city. And then in June of this year, the city is informed that the Star Tribune, or the staff is informed that the Star Tribune had obtained a copy of the working draft, and the Star Tribune published this article that day. On June 18th, several Minneapolis city council members on the Peace Committee issued a staff direction that the Office of Police Conduct Review is to complete its report and produce that back to them by the end of July, and that staff direction also calls for an external evaluation. At that same time, Mayor Fry and Chief Arredondo announced an independent investigation into the pre-hospital sedation reports. I'd like to emphasize that the questions that were developed by the Office of Police Conduct Review to carry out the program review, these questions were as follows. Were Minneapolis police officers conducting themselves appropriately when they were recommending or suggesting detained persons be injected with the sedative known as ketamine? If not, what should be done about it? And the second question is, if a medical study involving the injecting of a sedative known as ketamine was being conducted in Minneapolis on Minneapolis residents with the assistance of Minneapolis employees, did leadership and policymakers know about such a study? If not, what should be done about it? It was my belief and the team's belief that if these questions were answered for leadership and policymakers, we will have done our jobs as police oversight professionals and as Civil Rights Department employees. So as I mentioned, in late May into the middle of June, the working draft of the report was obtained by persons external to the city. Before those 2 research questions were completely answered. So the report, as has been mentioned previously by the clerk, is still in a draft form. When the working draft was prematurely obtained by these parties external to the city, in the interest of transparency, the Peace Committee approved a staff direction that requires an external evaluation or a peer review of the final draft report. Again, the draft is a non-public document, but the peer-reviewed final draft report is to be presented to the Public Safety Emergency Management Committee on July 26, 2018. So this peer review will allow the Office of Police Conduct Review team to complete its work, but should offer comfort to stakeholders that the work of the OPCR is sound, that its analysis is based on acceptable, professional, recognized standards, and that its findings and conclusions are appropriate, and any resulting recommendations are also appropriate. The peer review process that I've just mentioned is a unique addition to the process that I discussed earlier, because this is a unique circumstance. The report process in its normal evolution was circumvented when the report was obtained prematurely. The ordinance provides that in doing its work, the quote, analyst for the Office of Police Conduct Review shall organize and administer programs of research and study, and thus its programmatic reviews to operate without interference or other influence that might adversely affect an independent and objective judgment of the analyst, end quotes. Because of this premature release of the working draft to allay accusations of a loss of objectivity or neutrality, the Peace Committee issued its staff direction for the external evaluation. And again, this is not part of our normal process. The department is in the process of engaging the peer review team. Barring any unforeseen events, we expect to meet the deadline of July 26th. I'd like to also point out at this time that the Office of Police Conduct Review staff, who are the authors of this report, are both attorneys with experience in civilian oversight and program review. One is a certified government audit professional, certified by the Institute of Internal Auditors, and he must recertify each year, which requires him to attend continuing education classes. I mention this because for a peer review, it's critical that the team engaged also have the qualifications and experience to understand civilian oversight and program reviews and audits. So I've reached out to the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOL, for a referral. And for folks who have not heard of NACOL, it is a National Civilian Oversight Organization. It's a national nonprofit professional organization whose mission is to enhance accountability and transparency in policing and to build community. Further, their mission is to enhance the professional law enforcement response to community needs. I would end this by saying that the department has worked hard to hire the best and the brightest and to credential them, to build relationships so they can be an effective oversight mechanism. I have the utmost confidence in this team and believe that despite the energy and concern around this present situation, that we can move forward and continue to deliver results like we have in the past with every study that the Office of Police Conduct Review team has delivered through the Police Conduct Oversight Commission. And just as memory, just to jog your memory, some of those program reviews and audits include the body camera policy, research and study, the mental health and policing study that was formed the basis for the presentation that you just heard prior to this one, the complaint filing process study, and the most recent one is the evictions and calls for service study, which is commonly known as the conduct on licensed premise studies. And I would end at this point, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Director Corbel. I would ask you to stay close. I'll invite Deputy Chief Halverson to provide his remarks, and then I imagine that we'll have questions for both of you. Welcome, Deputy Chief.
Thanks for having me, Chair Fletcher, committee members. I'm here representing Chief Arredondo, who unfortunately had a previous engagement and was unable to attend this meeting today. However, I'm going to be reading a statement from him based on his response to this information. As Chief of the Minneapolis Police Department, I'm concerned by a number of comments reportedly made by our officers to emergency medical services personnel on specific medical calls. These comments were brought to my attention by a draft report by the OPCR, which states MPD officers either recommended or suggested medication or medical treatment for individuals encountered on emergency medical calls.
I take these allegations seriously. Matters that impact the public safety and well-being of the residents and visitors to our city are of the utmost importance to me. To make officers' procedures on such calls absolutely clear, an administrative announcement was sent out to the rank and file explaining the issue, and a recent policy was activated to address the issue moving forward. I did this as quickly as possible. Public safety and the sanctity of life are my first priorities and are at the center of every decision I make. As chief, I act on behalf of the over 400,000 residents of this city, and am dedicated to putting these priorities at the forefront of my decisions. To make decisions that significantly impact people's lives simply based on emotion and without all available facts would be irresponsible, dangerous, and a dereliction of my duties. I have confidence in the professional service the men and women of the Minneapolis Police Department provide to the residents of Minneapolis on a daily basis. And when that service can be improved, I'm committed to making those changes. But we also have an obligation to those we serve to provide clear and accurate data and reports. We strive for transparency, but for that to happen, we need full and correct information. The draft OPCR report is currently incomplete and does not contain all relevant facts and information from key stakeholders. This has prompted many to create their own narrative, and I strongly encourage everyone not to rush to judgment and make critical assumptions without having all the important factual information and data. When the report is final and the independent review has been completed, I'm committed to acting on the independent examiner's findings and any best practices set forth. Thank you, Chief Medaria Arredondo.
Thank you. I'll call on Councilmember Ellison.
Chief Deputy Halverson, just for clarity, aside beyond the written statement, folks might have some questions here. Council members will have questions. Do you still speak on behalf of the chief beyond the chief's statement?
I could speak to what we've discussed on this, and I could. We discuss items as a team, so I could. Yes, I think we're fairly well in alignment.
Awesome. Thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to start off with saying, repeating what I said at Monday's peace meeting, which is I am very appalled. I don't have a question for you if you want to go ahead and take a seat yet. But very appalled by the initial findings of this study. And I hear everyone here. Y'all showed up and spoke truth about what is happening, and I am very concerned. I share many of the concerns. I want to name that it is the job of the Civil Rights Department, which is largely made up of women and people of color. It's their job to push. It's their job to make people feel uncomfortable, because what the department does is it brings to light the ugliness of what discrimination in real time looks like and what the violation of people's civil rights, basic civil rights, looks like. I, as a Northsider, as a younger Black man, I have to say, like, this is Black people, non-compliant Black people who are disproportionately being impacted by this, and most likely in North Minneapolis. And so I have some serious concerns about it from from that equity lens about who is being targeted. So this is ugly, and I look forward to being able to read the completed study so that we can know if residents, particularly Black residents here in Minneapolis, are having our civil rights violated. I have a couple questions for Director Corbel. I just wanted to get some clarifying information based on the things that I have heard, some questions that I have heard, and some issues. So the first question I have is, was the OPCR and the PCOC planning to publish the draft study as the final copy?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, this program review is actually the work of the Office of Police Conduct Review. It's not a research and study that's being offered by the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, so I want to make that clear out of the gate. As I mentioned in my remarks, a working draft is never a final draft. And in order to create a final draft, there are other voices, other comments, other pieces of information that need to be considered in order to bring this to conclusion. It is unfortunate and regrettable that the working draft made it out into the public and that folks outside the city received that, but we are in the process of doing the fuller, more complete study, and we'll consider all the various pieces of input that we've gotten to this point.
Great, thank you. And I also wanted to share that I am the author of the staff direction, having the Civil Rights Department complete the study and then having the external evaluation. And I just wanted to give the feedback that I appreciate you hearing that. The peer review process, given that it's a research paper, was definitely what we had in mind as my colleagues and I talked about it, really being able to cover the bases of the methodology, being able to talk about the field work, the data that's included, the final report and recommendations. That is where a lot of the questions are. And so, so I just wanted to reflect back that you have heard the staff direction correctly, and I look forward to that work. Do you believe that the premature distribution of this study has compromised the objectivity of the OPCR to complete this study with integrity?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I don't think so in the long term, but in response to this present situation, I think the Peace Committee's production of the staff direction is very helpful because we welcome that second set of eyes on our work. We're not afraid to have our work reviewed, but I just want to bring some comfort to the stakeholders and also to the community that we do not want to have our integrity impugned in any way, but we are all about the transparency. And if it takes this extra look in this situation, we support that.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions for Chief Alverson. Thank you. The study is one thing, the conduct is another. And my questions are really to make sure that, as this is going forward, that this conduct is stopped. So my first question, after the administrative order, you feel confident that that's enough to send the message to all of your officers that until we learn more, this stops now?
Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Schrader, I think the administrative order, along with the policy that we sent out, is going to be kind of reinforcing the administrative order. The administrative order is usually sent out to all members of the police department, but it's usually we ask the supervisors to go over it with the officers at roll call, and kind of with the specific ideas, talking points on what to cover and what we're addressing. So we do believe that it's going to hit exactly the points we're looking for on this. And advising the officers that we are not on scene of these medical calls, and we are not to be giving any direction to EMS personnel on any type of medical assistance or medical direction on what they'd like to do with them.
Thank you. And the second one, I mean, you've mentioned the medical professionals. That's under the county. So is there more we need to be looking for? Because have they done similar actions? Are they also questioning this? Or is this, my concern is, are they going to be continue this policy of using ketamine? Or is that being questioned right now, as far as you know?
Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Schrader, from the information I had received, I think is the same as everybody received from the public statements they gave. It appears that they were, I did not hear them say anything about stopping their decision on going forth with their research.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ellison.
Chief W. Alverson, I have a handful of questions. the mayor and the police chief have put out a handful of press releases, and I might not be all the way up to date. Have you all put out a press release, a joint press release with Director Corbel regarding this matter?
Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Ellison, I do not believe so. No.
Okay. Given that her department is sort of the primary victim this leak, right? Because now they have a incomplete study that is now up for scrutiny. When, as Director Corbel said, usually it would be a completed study that would be up for public scrutiny and peer review. Just wanted to make sure that was on the mind and that on you all's mind, and that Chief Arredondo could maybe make a commitment to making a strong statement with our Director of Civil Rights as well. A few other questions. You all mentioned that this third-party investigation is going to be something that you and the mayor are pursuing. Is that going to be in line with will the peer review that Director Corbel satisfy that, or are you all looking at doing your own sort of investigation? If so, what exactly is the desired outcome of that investigation? What exactly is being investigated?
Sure. Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Ellison. I spoke to the chief about that yesterday and got an update. So he and the mayor have been in close discussions regarding that topic. They are very close to picking an independent investigator. They are trying to narrow the search down. They do have some people in mind. They have a couple criteria they're looking for. One, they're looking for someone who is not affiliated with the city. Two, not affiliated with the police department. And three, they're possibly looking at somebody that's out of state to do the investigation. They have some people in mind. However, they have not settled yet on a name with the information I received. So based on our end, what we're going to be looking at is if we had officers that were administering the ketamine, which even prior to the policy, we were not authorized to be doing. So basically to focus on what our officers were doing at the scenes, specifically related to the ketamine.
One of the things that I think is really important here is that the city as a whole make a commitment to civil rights, right? That's what this is all about. And I think that in a couple of statements, both the joint statement by the mayor and the chief's public statement that is on the MPD website, and the lack of a joint statement from with Director Corbel, I want to make sure that we're not creating the sense that the mayor or the police chief are questioning the objectivity of our civil rights department and the officer conduct review process. Would you be willing to affirm your commitment to? Would you be able to affirm that your commitment that you do believe that our civil rights department is still an objective party here and that they are competent of completing this report?
Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Ellison, I can tell you, I've worked directly with the members of the OPCR and civil rights for the last approximately 4 or 5 years. Prior to my role here, I was in internal affairs, and I've been very impressed with the work they do, and we've built that relationship, and I think we can still keep that relationship. I think they can still look at this information, gather it, and put together a comprehensive, objective report that can gather all the data, all the pertinent information, and give you a snapshot of what they're looking for and what we need to address.
So you're confident in their objectivity to finish the report?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Yeah, that's all I have for right now.
Were there any other comments or questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Paul Massano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question for Deputy Chief Halverson. Deputy Chief, I'm wondering, with the information that we have, which is incomplete, and for me only what I've read through the media, I haven't seen a draft report. it is concerning that there was such a vast increase from 2 to 70 cases, and it makes me uncomfortable. I think it makes all of us uncomfortable not to know what the cause was. Did the increased use of this, to your knowledge, somehow get rolled out in some way to MPD through training? Like, was some information provided to officers in any sort of a training setting?
I think it'd be really difficult for me to, Chair Fletcher, Councilman Palmisano, I think it'd be really difficult for me to speak to that right now, given the investigation is still incomplete. It's possible they may have some other ideas that they want to, some other avenues on why they believe that is. And I kind of want to give them their ability to, investigate down those avenues. And I don't want to really steer them a certain way. So I think it would do a disservice, I think, to their investigation to really speak to some of my thoughts on it or ideas, to be honest with you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ellison.
I did have a question. I think this has come up a few times. While we're still investigating whether or not police officers themselves did the injecting, we know via the transcripts that a number of officers were sort of making demands or suggestions. Have those officers been disciplined in any way? And if so, how?
Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Ellison, nobody has been disciplined from this at all yet. Again, the study is still in draft phase, so we don't have a lot of the information. We have not gone forth and fully identified all the officers yet on our end, the police department's end, regarding the information the OPCR has. So nobody has been disciplined on this. However, I did speak to that we will also be looking at officers that may have asked for it, that may have asked for the ketamine. Just thinking off the top of my head, there is some possible, we could be looking at some type of policy violation for those officers also.
And then last sort of handful of questions. The Dr. Jeffrey Ho has been mentioned in the media and has been mentioned here today. Will the independent investigation that the mayor and the chief are pursuing also include some kind of medical consensus on this excited delirium?
Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Ellison, I couldn't speak to that, to be honest with you. I would think, just being working investigations, it would probably be something that you would want to include in that report. That'd be my thought. But again, that would be whoever the independent investigator is, that'd be their decision to go forth with that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just more of a comment. I just want to go back and reiterate. I think this term civil rights has really been a little bit worn out and lost a lot of its power. But to take a step back and look at it, civil rights are basically the right to basic human dignity and to be treated with basic humanity. When people say civil rights, they think a lot of times of the 1960s and the civil rights movement. It's right here and right now. We are still fighting the same battles that we have generations ago. It just looks different now. So I just really want to take a moment to really reiterate the power of our civil rights and that they are not violated. We are not done having this conversation because the civil rights was done. We are not done. And I also just want to speak to something I've heard from out in the community of people saying, oh, well, you know, you've never had to work with folks who have been violent and et cetera, et cetera. Well, I have been a special education teacher with students whose their disabilities showed up violently, and I would never, ever, ever allow this to be used on them. And so to the point of, you know, well, you just don't understand. It's like, well, you know, I can say personally that I have been in this work before, and I would never, ever want to see that used on my students. In fact, I would fight very hard for them. So I just really wanted to take a moment to speak again that our civil rights are powerful, and we cannot let this slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to everybody who came forward to testify. I think it was very important that we created space for public comment today, because I think we all needed to hear from the community, and we needed to hear how this information was landing, how this information was circulating. how people are feeling. I think we heard that this feels like a real violation of trust. And I think, to me, we have a lot of information that we still need. This report is in progress, and I want to thank the Civil Rights Department and OPCR for your work in moving this forward and in bringing this to our attention. It was awful to hear, and it would be even more awful to have it happening in our community and not know. So I really appreciate that this information is coming forward for us. And whether we discover that there were policy violations or not as we move through this, whether we discover that our officers directly ordered or had a legally inappropriate role in administering ketamine, what I can tell you is that this feels like a violation of the spirit of our community to hear that they were asking for it. What I would hope for when we hear about ketamine being used in the street, what most of us feel is recoiling. This is awful. This is something that we don't want to have happening in our community. And when we hear something that sounds monstrous to us, it is our hope and it is our expectation that our sworn officers who we are counting on to think of our well-being and who we entrust with a great deal of responsibility to consider our well-being would also recoil from that action. And so to hear officers asking for it to be administered is harmful to the community trust. And I think that that's what we heard today, and I think it's very important that we say that out loud. I think it's very important that that be a part of this conversation. Seeing no further comments from the committee, I just want to express again my gratitude to the city staff who put together this presentation on relatively short notice. And I would like to move that we receive and file the staff report. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That carries, and that report will be filed. And I believe I forgot to do that for the previous report. So if I can also move that we receive and file the report on co-responders. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That carries as well. Those reports have been filed, and that completes the committee's business. We are adjourned.